The conference chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal, a monument to power that had taken 2 centuries to build. Inside, representatives from thousands of species gathered in their designated sections, each area marked by floating symbols that glowed with their homeworld's colors. The air processors worked constantly to maintain breathable atmospheres for the different species, creating invisible barriers that separated oxygen breathers from methane consumers, silicon-based life forms from carbon dwellers. David Reed sat alone in the human section, a small platform barely large enough for his simple chair and desk. Around him, massive delegations filled entire wings of the chamber. The Tarn Supremacy occupied a space that could hold 500 individuals. The Vryn Empire commanded an entire upper gallery. Even the smallest recognized powers had seating for at least 50 representatives. Humanity had 1 chair, 1 desk, and 1 man. The Summit of Powers occurred once every cycle, a gathering where the galaxy's rulers discussed trade, territorial disputes, and the admission of new species into the galactic community. For 10,000 cycles, this system had maintained order across billions of stars. The hierarchy was clear and absolute. Military strength determined status. Technology determined respect. Humanity had neither. High Chancellor Brovik rose from his elevated throne, his 4 arms spreading wide in a gesture of dominance. His species, the Tarn, stood 3 meters tall with armored hide that could deflect plasma fire. They had ruled the Galactic Council for 3,000 cycles, their military might unquestioned by any who valued their survival. "We address the matter of the human petition," Brovik announced. His voice amplified across the massive chamber. Laughter rippled through the assembled species. "A Class 7 civilization requests full council membership and trade rights across all established routes." More laughter, louder this time. David remained still, his hands folded on the desk before him. His species had prepared him for this reaction. Earth sociologists had studied every available record of galactic politics. They knew what to expect. "The humans travel in ships powered by controlled explosions," a representative from the Kelvin Consortium shouted. "They burn chemicals to escape their own gravity well. Their fastest vessels require months to cross their own star system," another voice added. "They have not even mastered basic fusion propulsion." David made a note on his datapad. The insults continued, each species adding their own assessment of humanity's primitive status. The Vryn ambassador described human technology as barely adequate for asteroid mining. The Dreven representative, typically peaceful and diplomatic, suggested humanity should wait at least another 1,000 cycles before reapplying for even basic trading rights. Throughout it all, David listened. He recorded every statement, every laugh, every dismissive gesture. His expression never changed. When the chamber finally quieted, Brovik leaned forward on his throne. "Human ambassador, you have heard the Council's assessment. Your species lacks the technology, the military strength, and the cultural development to participate in galactic affairs. We will grant you observer status, nothing more. You may watch our proceedings and learn from those greater than yourselves. Perhaps in another age your descendants will be ready to join us as equals." David stood slowly. His body language remained relaxed, almost casual compared to the formal postures of the other ambassadors. "High Chancellor, Council members, I thank you for your time and your honest evaluation of humanity's status. You accept our judgment?" Brovik seemed surprised. "I accept that you have made your assessment based on the information available to you," David replied. His tone was neither angry nor submissive, simply factual. "Earth's scout ships and exploration vessels represent our earliest attempts at interstellar travel. They are indeed primitive by your standards. We do not dispute this. Then you withdraw your petition?" "Not at all, High Chancellor. I simply wish to note that Earth sent me ahead as a courtesy to introduce ourselves and explain our intentions before our formal delegation arrives." The laughter that followed was the loudest yet. Several species made sounds that their translators rendered as versions of mockery. The idea that humanity had a more impressive delegation waiting was treated as a desperate bluff from a species that had already revealed its limitations. "When might we expect this impressive delegation?" Brovik asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. David checked his datapad. "Approximately 72 hours from now, High Chancellor. The UHSV Absolute Horizon is currently in slip space transit and will arrive at the coordinates you provided for diplomatic meetings." "A single ship?" The Vryn admiral spoke up from his gallery. You send one ship as your delegation? One ship will be sufficient, David answered. Then we await this ship with great anticipation, Brovik said, though his tone made clear he anticipated nothing but further disappointment. Until then, Ambassador Reed, you may observe our proceedings. Perhaps you will learn something about how advanced civilizations conduct their affairs. David sat down, returning his attention to his datapad. Around him, the council moved on to other matters. Trade disputes between the Kelvin Consortium and the Vryn Empire, territorial negotiations in the Outer Spiral Arms, the admission of a Class 4 species that had achieved faster-than-light travel through dimensional folding. Each matter was discussed, debated, and resolved according to the power dynamics that had governed the galaxy for millennia. Throughout the discussions, David took notes. He recorded voting patterns, noted which species aligned with which factions, observed the subtle power plays that occurred beneath the formal protocols. He was, after all, an observer. His job was to observe and report back to Earth, but he was also something else, though none of the assembled species knew it yet. He was a placeholder, a diplomatic courtesy extended by a species that still believed in protocol even when dealing with those who showed them no respect. Earth had sent David Reed ahead because humanity believed in proper procedure, in following established customs and showing good faith even to those who mocked them. In 72 hours, the galaxy would learn what else humanity believed in. They would learn what happens when a species that evolved on a death world, that survived ice ages and plagues and wars that nearly destroyed their entire civilization, decides to reach for the stars. They would learn that humanity's scout ships and chemical rockets were not the limit of human achievement, but merely the beginning. David saved his notes and closed his datapad. 72 hours. He could wait that long. After all, humanity had waited 4 billion years to meet their neighbors. 3 more days would not matter. Sensor arrays across 50 star systems began screaming warnings simultaneously, their automated alerts flooding communication channels with data that made no sense. Chief Analyst Rena of the Vryn Empire stared at her displays, convinced the systems had malfunctioned. The readings showed something massive moving through slipspace, but the scale was impossible. She ran diagnostics 3 times before accepting that the sensors were functioning correctly. The problem was not with the equipment. The problem was with reality itself. Admiral Cross, we have an anomaly approaching the council station, Rena reported, her voice tight with confusion. Gravitational readings are off every known scale. Whatever is coming toward us is generating spatial distortions visible from 40 light-years away. Admiral Cross appeared on her communication screen, his scaled features twisted in annoyance. Rena, I am in the middle of a diplomatic dinner. This had better be worth interrupting me. Sir, I would not contact you unless I was certain. The gravitational signature suggests an object with mass exceeding most planetary bodies. It is moving through slipspace at speeds that should collapse the dimensional membrane. According to our models, what I am seeing cannot exist. The Admiral's expression shifted from annoyance to concern. Send me the data. Across the station, similar conversations were taking place in a dozen different command centers. The Tarn military coordinators were arguing about whether the readings indicated a natural phenomenon or a weapon. The Kelvin science teams were frantically recalculating their data, certain their instruments had been damaged. The Dreven Consortium was quietly evacuating their civilian personnel to ships docked at the far side of the station. Within an hour, every species present at the summit knew something was approaching. Within 2 hours, they knew it would arrive in less than 48 hours. Within 3 hours, panic had spread through the station like poison through water. High Chancellor Brovik convened an emergency military council. Representatives from 38 species gathered in a secured chamber, their holographic projections forming a circle around a central display. The display showed the anomaly's projected path, a line that led directly to the council station's coordinates. Analysis, Brovik demanded. A Tarn military scientist stepped forward. High Chancellor, the object is generating gravitational waves strong enough to affect nearby star systems. We have detected minor orbital perturbations in 3 systems along its path. The energy signature suggests either a failing star in its final stages, or artificial generation on a scale we have never encountered. Could it be a weapon? The Vryn Admiral leaned forward, his claws scraping against his armrests. If it is a weapon, it is beyond our capacity to defend against. The mass alone, if it impacted this station, would vaporize everything within a light second. But the trajectory is too precise for an attack. Whatever this is, it is under intelligent control and navigating with extreme accuracy. Origin point? Brovik asked. The scientist hesitated. That is the disturbing part, High Chancellor. Backtracking the trajectory places the origin point in the Sol system. Human space. Silence filled the chamber. Several representatives began speaking at once, their voices overlapping in confusion and denial. Humans? The Class 7 species that barely managed chemical propulsion? Impossible. The humans have been surveyed extensively, someone argued. We have watched their homeworld for 2 cycles. Their largest ships are barely 300 meters long. They are decades away from achieving stable slipspace technology, unless they were hiding their capabilities, Admiral Cross said quietly, unless everything we saw was what they wanted us to see. The implications hung in the air like a physical weight. Every species in the chamber had enemies, rivals, competitors, but they all operated within known parameters. Technology advanced gradually. Power structures remained stable. The idea that a species could hide capabilities on this scale was terrifying, because it meant the entire foundation of galactic politics might be built on false assumptions. We need to prepare defenses, Brovik decided. Admiral Cross mobilized the Vryn fleet. Position them in defensive formations around this station. I want every ship we have available here within 24 hours. High Chancellor, if this object is as massive as the readings suggest, our fleet will be insignificant. Like insects defending against a meteor. Then we will be armed insects. Do it. The order went out across all military channels. Ships from 38 different species began converging on the Council Station. The Vryn Empire contributed 1,200 warships, their most powerful dreadnoughts each measuring 12 kilometers in length and carrying enough firepower to reduce a planetary surface to molten slag. The Tarn Supremacy sent 800 vessels. The Kelvin Consortium added 400 more. Smaller powers contributed what they could. Dozens of ships here, hundreds there. Within 30 hours, over 4,000 warships had formed a defensive perimeter around the Council Station. It was the largest military assembly in recorded galactic history, a show of force that could conquer entire star systems. Every weapon system was charged and ready. Every captain had orders to fire on anything that emerged from slipspace as a threat. David Reed watched the military build up from his quarters on the station. His window provided a view of the gathering fleet, a constellation of warships that stretched across the darkness like a net of deadly stars. He sipped his coffee slowly, reading reports on his datapad that contained information that galactic species would have killed to possess. The absolute horizon was not a weapon. It was not an anomaly. It was a ship, built by human hands in orbital shipyards that circled Jupiter's moons. It was one of 7 identical vessels, each representing humanity's answer to a simple question. How do you protect yourselves when you have no natural defenses? Humans were not strong like the Tarn. They had no armored hides, no poisonous bites, no telepathic abilities. They were fragile creatures from a world that tried constantly to kill them. They survived through intelligence, adaptability, and the absolute determination to never be helpless again. Earth had seen the galactic powers and their hierarchies. They had watched how military strength determined status, how technology determined respect, so they had built accordingly. They had poured resources into projects that other species would consider insane. They had pushed their engineering to limits that defied conventional physics, and now the galaxy would see the results. David finished his coffee and checked the time, 22 hours until arrival. He wondered if he should warn them again, explain that the absolute horizon meant no harm, that humanity came in peace and simply wanted to talk. But he had tried that. His warnings had been dismissed as bluster from a desperate species, so he would let the ship speak for itself. Outside his window, the fleet continued to grow. More ships arrived every hour, adding their mass and firepower to the defensive wall. Captains shouted orders. Crews ran combat drills. Weapon systems were tested and retested until every ship reported ready status. They were preparing for war against an enemy they could not imagine, arming themselves against a threat they did not understand. In less than a day, they would learn that all their preparations, all their weapons, all their power was meaningless against what humanity had built. David set down his empty cup and returned to his reports. He had work to do. After all, once the absolute horizon arrived, the real negotiations would begin, and Earth needed him ready to represent their interests to a galaxy that was about to have its entire worldview shattered. Reality tore open like fabric ripped by invisible hands. The slipspace exit point materialized exactly where humanity had calculated it would, precise to within 3 meters across a distance of 40 light-years. For a moment, space itself seemed to hold its breath as something incomprehensibly massive began, pushing through the dimensional barrier between faster-than-light travel and normal space. Every sensor on every ship registered the transition. Gravitational detectors went from warning levels to emergency alerts. Energy scanners reported readings that exceeded their maximum calibration. Visual tracking systems struggled to process what they were seeing because the object emerging from slipspace was too large for their automatic scaling programs to handle. The UHSV Absolute Horizon entered real space like a mountain, pushing through a waterfall. The ship's bow appeared first, a dark expanse of hull that seemed to absorb the light from nearby stars. The material was not metal, at least not any metal the assembled species recognized. It had a quality that made eyes slide away from it, a darkness that was not simply black but rather the absence of reflection altogether. The bow kept coming, and coming, and coming. Admiral Cross felt his breathing stop as his ship's computer continued calculating the vessel's dimensions. 100 kilometers, 200, 300. At 400 kilometers, the measurements finally stabilized. The human ship was 417 kilometers from bow to stern, massing more than most moons, displacing enough space that its gravity well was affecting ships at the edges of the defensive formation. "Weapons check," Cross heard himself say, though his voice sounded distant to his own ears. "Confirm all targeting solutions," his tactical officer responded, but the words were meaningless. Cross had fought in 17 major fleet engagements. He had commanded attacks on fortified positions that cost thousands of lives. He understood military force and the mathematics of warfare, and he understood in that moment that everything he knew was worthless. The human ship was not just large, it was impossibly large. His flagship, the pride of the Vryn Empire at 12 kilometers long, could fit inside one of the human vessel's hangar bays. The entire defensive fleet, 4,000 ships strong, could probably fit inside the Absolute Horizon's internal volume with room to spare. But size was not the only concern. As the ship completed its transition into normal space, details became visible on its hull. Thousands of them, tens of thousands. Weapons ports covered every surface in geometric patterns that spoke of devastating fields of fire. Point defense systems, missile tubes, energy weapon apertures, and structures whose purposes could only be guessed at. The ship did not merely carry weapons. It was built as a weapon, every centimeter of its hull designed for violence on a scale the galaxy had never imagined. On the council station, High Chancellor Brovik stood before his command display, his forearms hanging limp at his sides. Around him, his military advisors were shouting, but he heard none of it. The Tarn supremacy had ruled through strength for 3,000 cycles. Their fleet was the largest. Their weapons were the most advanced. Their military doctrine had conquered dozens of resistant species and brought them into the galactic hierarchy through force. All of that meant nothing. The humans had built something that rendered the entire concept of military hierarchy obsolete. One ship. They had sent one ship, and it was more powerful than the combined forces of the 38 most advanced species in the galaxy. Across all communication channels, silence fell. Captains forgot the orders they were shouting. Tactical officers stopped updating firing solutions. Engineers stared at their displays, trying to understand how the human ship was even possible. The physics alone should have torn it apart. A vessel that massive should collapse under its own gravity, yet it maintained perfect structural integrity. The energy requirements to move something that large through slipspace should require the output of an entire star. Yet the humans had done it. Then the Absolute Horizon spoke. The transmission came through every channel simultaneously, in every language the galaxy used. The signal was so clean, so perfectly modulated that it made standard galactic communication protocols seem crude by comparison. And the message was devastatingly simple. United Humanity Starship Vessel Absolute Horizon, requesting permission to dock diplomatic shuttle. Ambassador Reed, please prepare for retrieval. David Reed stood in his quarters, watching the chaos through his window. Ships were breaking formation, their captains unable to maintain discipline in the face of what they were seeing. Some vessels were actively backing away, putting distance between themselves and the human ship. Others held position but had clearly powered down their weapons, recognizing the futility of any aggressive action. He activated his communicator. Absolute Horizon, this is Ambassador Reed. Permission to dock is currently pending. The station's command structure appears to be experiencing some difficulty processing your arrival. Understood, Ambassador. The voice that responded was calm, professional, and entirely human. We will maintain position at 15,000 kilometers and await formal clearance. Please advise Station Command that we mean no harm and request standard diplomatic protocols be observed. David switched his communicator to the station's command frequency. Hi, Chancellor Brovik. This is Ambassador Reed. The vessel that has just arrived is humanity's formal delegation, as I mentioned 3 days ago. The Absolute Horizon is here for diplomatic purposes only. We request permission to dock a shuttle and begin formal negotiations regarding humanity's petition for council membership. The response took several minutes. When Brovik's voice finally came through, it shook with barely controlled emotion. Ambassador Reed, you will explain how your species accomplished this. You will explain why our scouts reported primitive technology. You will explain everything, or we will consider your presence here an act of deception and espionage. High Chancellor, humanity never lied to you. Your scouts encountered our exploration vessels, which do indeed use chemical propulsion and basic fusion technology. Those are real ships serving real purposes. We simply did not show you our military capabilities, because we had no reason to do so until formal diplomatic relations began. You call that thing a military vessel? One of 7 Titan-class vessels currently in service, with 3 more under construction. Yes, High Chancellor. The Absolute Horizon is a military vessel. It is humanity's statement that we will not be threatened, will not be conquered, and will not be dismissed. We came to the stars hoping to find friends and equals. We built ships like the Absolute Horizon in case we found enemies instead. Another long silence followed. David could imagine the conversations happening on every ship, in every command center, the desperate recalculations of power structures, the terrified realization that humanity could, if they chose, conquer the entire known galaxy. The question everyone would be asking, what do the humans want? Your shuttle is cleared for docking, Brovik said finally. But Ambassador Reed, you and your ship will answer many questions before this day is done. We expected nothing less, High Chancellor. The Absolute Horizon will launch my retrieval shuttle momentarily. I look forward to continuing our discussions with the full council. David ended the transmission and gathered his materials. Through his window he watched as a small craft detached from the massive human vessel. The shuttle was tiny compared to its parent ship, barely 300 meters long, but it moved with grace and precision that spoke of technologies the galaxy did not possess. As the shuttle approached the station, David allowed himself a small smile. 3 days ago, the galactic powers had laughed at humanity's petition. They had mocked human technology and dismissed human aspirations. They had treated Earth as insignificant, barely worth acknowledging. In a few hours, humanity would present its terms for joining the galactic community. And this time, he suspected, there would be no laughter. This time, when humanity spoke, the galaxy would listen. Because hovering in space 15,000 kilometers away was 400 kilometers of proof that humanity was nobody's inferior. The age of human isolation was over. What came next would depend on whether the galaxy chose friendship or fear. But either way, they would never dismiss humanity again. Fear smells the same across species, David thought, as he walked through the council station's corridors. The air recyclers could not quite filter out the chemical signals of panic that dozens of different species produced when confronted with their own insignificance. Tarn guards stood at every intersection, their weapons held ready but their body language betraying uncertainty. What good were plasma rifles against a ship that could probably survive a direct hit from a star? The emergency council session had been called within an hour of the Absolute Horizon's arrival. Every ambassador, every military commander, every species representative who had mocked humanity 3 days ago now waited in the great chamber. David walked alone, his footsteps echoing in spaces designed to intimidate visitors with their vast scale. But after seeing the Absolute Horizon, the station's grandeur seemed almost quaint. He entered the chamber to find it transformed. The casual atmosphere of the previous session had vanished, replaced by tension so thick it felt physical. Every eye tracked his movement as he walked to the human section. His single chair and small desk suddenly seemed less like an insult and more like a statement. One human, one chair. That was all Earth needed to send. High Chancellor Brovik stood at his throne, his forearms crossed in a gesture that usually indicated authority, but now looked defensive. Ambassador Reed, the Council demands answers. How did your species hide such capabilities? What else have you concealed from us? David settled into his chair and activated his datapad. High Chancellor, members of the Council, humanity has hidden nothing. We have been entirely transparent about our technological development. When your scouts surveyed our system, they observed our exploration and research vessels. Those ships use chemical rockets and basic fusion drives exactly as reported. They are real vessels serving real purposes in our scientific and commercial operations. But that ship, a Kelvin representative interrupted, pointing upward as if the absolute horizon could be seen through the station's hull. That ship represents technology centuries beyond what you showed us. The absolute horizon represents our military technology, which we saw no reason to display until formal diplomatic relations began. Surely you understand the difference between civilian infrastructure and military capability. Or do your species fly warships for commercial freight operations? The question hung in the air. Of course they did not. Every species maintained separate civilian and military technologies. But the gap between human civilian and military capabilities was so vast that it seemed impossible. Admiral Cross stood in his gallery. Ambassador, I have commanded fleets for 40 cycles. I have studied military engineering across hundreds of species. What you have created should not be possible. The energy requirements alone to move a vessel that size through slip space should require harvesting, a star's entire output for years. You are correct that conventional fusion technology could not power the absolute horizon, David replied. But humanity does not use conventional fusion. Our Titan-class vessels utilize zero-point energy extraction directly from quantum vacuum fluctuations. The technology is complex, but it provides effectively unlimited power for vessels of any size. The silence that followed was different from before. This was not the silence of shock, but of comprehension. They were beginning to understand. Humanity had not just built a bigger ship. They had solved fundamental engineering problems that the galaxy considered unsolvable. They had developed technologies that existed only in theoretical physics papers. How long? Brovik asked quietly. How long have your species possessed such technology? The first successful zero-point extraction occurred 18 years ago. The Absolute Horizon was commissioned 7 years ago and entered service 3 years ago. Her sister ships followed at intervals of approximately 6 months each. 18 years, a Dreven ambassador repeated. We have been watching your system for 2 cycles, and you developed this in less than 20 years. Human technological development accelerates rapidly once fundamental barriers are broken. We went from first powered flight to landing on our moon in 66 years. From our moon landing to achieving stable fusion in 43 years. From fusion to zero-point extraction in 72 years. From zero-point extraction to launching the Absolute Horizon in 18 years. Each breakthrough enables the next to come faster. David paused, letting the implications sink in. Then he activated a holographic display above his desk. Images appeared, rotating slowly. 7 massive vessels identical to the Absolute Horizon, each floating in space above different orbital facilities. 3 partially constructed frameworks showed Titan-class vessels in various stages of completion. These are humanity's current military assets in the Titan-class category. 7 operational vessels, 3 under construction. Each is equipped with zero-point reactors, quantum-locked armor, and weapon systems that utilize technologies you do not possess. I am authorized to provide technical specifications if the Council wishes to review them. Why? The question came from Ambassador Sila of the Dreven Consortium, her voice carrying genuine confusion rather than accusation. Why did you build such vessels? Your system has no enemies. You are surrounded by empty space. What threat did you need to defend against? David met her eyes. Ambassador Sila, humanity evolved on a world that tried to kill us every day. Ice ages, plagues, predators, environmental disasters. We survived by being adaptable and by learning from our mistakes. Our history is full of conflicts, of empires rising and falling, of strong nations conquering weak ones. We learned painful lessons about what happens to species without adequate defenses. He stood, his voice carrying across the chamber. When we reached for the stars, we hoped to find friends. We hoped to find species that valued cooperation and mutual respect, but we also remembered our history. We remembered what happens when the strong meet the weak, when those with weapons meet those without. So we built the Titan-class vessels as insurance. We built them so that if we found predators instead of friends, we would not be helpless prey. You built them to conquer us, Brovik accused. No, High Chancellor. We built them so you could not conquer us. There is a significant difference. David reactivated his display and new images appeared. Detailed schematics of the Absolute Horizon's weapon systems filled the air. The assembled species leaned forward, their earlier fear now mixed with professional curiosity. What they saw was both fascinating and terrifying. The Absolute Horizon's primary armament consists of 12 spinal-mounted particle accelerators. Each accelerator can deliver focused energy, equivalent to a moderate solar flare directly to a target. Effective range is approximately 1 light second. These weapons are designed to engage planetary fortifications or vessels of equivalent mass to the Absolute Horizon itself. Images shifted, showing smaller weapon systems covering the hull like scales on a fish. Secondary armament includes 400 missile tubes loaded with various warhead types, from conventional explosives to exotic matter weapons. Tertiary systems consist of 8,000 point defense turrets utilizing rapid-fire particle beams. These are designed to intercept incoming missiles, fighters, and other small craft. Admiral Cross was making calculations on his own display. David watched him work, watched the realization spread across his scaled features. The point defense systems alone, Cross said slowly, have more combined firepower than my entire fleet. Correct, Admiral. The Absolute Horizon was designed to operate independently in hostile space without support. It must be capable of defending itself against any threat, including massed fleet actions. David closed the display and sat down. But here is what I want you to understand. These weapons have never been fired in anger. The Absolute Horizon has never engaged in combat. None of our Titan-class vessels have. Because humanity built them not for conquest but for deterrence. We built them so that when we came to you and asked to be treated as equals, you would know that we were equals, not through arrogance, but through capability. The chamber remained silent. David could see the calculations happening behind alien eyes. Every species was reassessing their position, their power, their place in the galactic hierarchy. Everything they had believed about the balance of power had been proven false in a single day. What do you want from us? Ambassador Sila asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. The same thing we asked for 3 days ago, David replied. Fair trade agreements, cultural exchange, and equal representation on this council. Nothing more. We want to join the galactic community as partners, not as conquerors or subjects. The Absolute Horizon exists to ensure that we have that choice. Pride is a dangerous thing in warfare. Admiral Cross had learned this truth across 4 decades of military service. Yet as he listened to High Chancellor Brovik's private communications, he realized the lesson had not penetrated deep enough into Tarn leadership. The Chancellor was planning something catastrophically stupid, and Cross was being ordered to help make it happen. The Council will not accept this shift in power without proof, Brovik said over the secure channel. Ambassador Reed speaks of deterrence and defense, but we have only seen their ship exist. We do not know if it can fight. High Chancellor, with respect, we do not need to know if it can fight. The specifications alone suggest capabilities far beyond our ability to counter. Engaging the human vessel would be suicide. Then we will not engage it, Admiral. We will perform a standard military exercise, a demonstration of our own capabilities. If the humans truly come in peace, they will allow us to conduct routine fleet operations near their vessel. If they react with hostility, we will know their true intentions. Cross felt his blood run cold. High Chancellor, any military maneuvers near the Absolute Horizon will be interpreted as threatening behavior. Their defensive systems will respond. Then they will prove themselves the aggressors and the Council will unite against them. Or they will do nothing and we will prove that their ship is merely size without substance. Either way, the Tarn supremacy demonstrates strength. Make the arrangements, Admiral. Our fleet will conduct exercises at the coordinates I am transmitting within the hour. The communication ended before Cross could argue further. He sat in his command chair staring at the coordinates. They would place the Tarn fleet within weapons range of the human vessel. Not hostile range, technically, but close enough that weapons could be brought to bear within seconds. It was provocative, aggressive, and incredibly dangerous. But orders were orders. Cross activated his fleet-wide channel and began issuing commands he prayed he would not regret. On the absolute horizon, Lieutenant Sarah Park monitored the activity in the fleet surrounding the station. She had been watching the Tarn vessels for the past 20 minutes, noting their formation changes and course corrections. At first, she assumed they were repositioning for better defensive coverage. Then the pattern became clear. Captain Wilson, the Tarn fleet is moving toward our position. Current trajectory will bring them to within 50,000 kilometers in approximately 30 minutes. Captain Rachel Wilson appeared on her screen, her expression calm despite the implications. Are they broadcasting any intentions? Negative, Captain. No communication from Tarn Command. But their weapon systems are powering up. Not targeting protocols yet, but definitely preparing for potential engagement. Wilson tapped her fingers on her armrest, a habit from her years commanding destroyer-class vessels before transferring to the Titan program. Alert Ambassador Reed. Then bring defensive systems to ready status, but do not activate targeting. I want the Tarn to know we see them, but I do not want to escalate. Yes, Captain. David received the alert while speaking with Ambassador Sila in one of the station's diplomatic lounges. The Dreven ambassador had sought private conversation, her species being one of the few that seemed genuinely interested in peaceful relations rather than viewing humanity as a threat or opportunity. I apologize, Ambassador Sila, but I need to make an urgent call. David activated his communicator. Captain Wilson, what is happening? Ambassador, the Tarn fleet is approaching our position. 1,200 vessels in standard attack formation, weapon systems active. No hostile actions yet, but the situation is developing. David closed his eyes. They are going to test us. That would be my assessment. What are your orders? Do not fire first under any circumstances, but defend the ship if attacked. I will contact High Chancellor Brovik immediately. David switched channels connecting to the Council's priority communication system. Brovik's face appeared on the screen, his expression unreadable. High Chancellor, I am receiving reports that the Tarn fleet is approaching the absolute horizon in attack formation. I must ask you to order them to stand down. This is an extremely dangerous situation. Ambassador Reed, the Tarn supremacy is conducting routine military exercises. We have every right to operate our fleet in this sector, unless you claim ownership of all space around your vessel. High Chancellor, my ship's defensive AI will interpret your fleet's approach as hostile action. At the range you are approaching, our automated systems may engage without human authorization. People will die and it will be for nothing. Please order your fleet to maintain distance. If your ship fires on our vessels during a routine exercise, it will prove humanity's true hostile intentions. The choice is yours, Ambassador. The communication ended. David stood frozen for a moment, then ran toward the docking bay where his shuttle waited. Behind him, Ambassador Sila followed, her species' empathic abilities probably sensing his terror. This was not how things were supposed to go. Earth had sent the Titan-class vessels to prevent war, not to start one. On the absolute horizon, alarms began sounding as the Tarn fleet crossed the 50,000-kilometer threshold. Captain Wilson sat in her command chair, surrounded by holographic displays showing every vessel in the approaching fleet. 1,200 warships, each armed and ready, closing on her position. Defensive systems are tracking all targets, Lieutenant Park reported. AI is requesting authorization to engage. Denied. Hold fire unless they fire first. Captain, at their current speed, they will reach optimal firing range in 7 minutes. If they target us, we will have less than 3 seconds to respond before they can launch. I understand the math, Lieutenant. Hold fire! The Tarn fleet continued its approach. 40,000 kilometers, 30,000, 20,000. Admiral Cross watched the range indicators decrease, his hands gripping his armrests. He had ordered his fleet to arm weapons, but not to target the human ship. It was a fine distinction, but it was all that separated this exercise from an actual attack. Admiral, the human vessel has activated its defensive systems, his tactical officer reported. Point defense turrets are tracking our ships. They have targeting locks on every vessel in our fleet. Maintain formation. Do not target their ship. 15,000 kilometers. The distance was nothing in space combat. Close enough that weapons fire would cross the gap in seconds. Cross could see the absolute horizon on his main display, its massive hull covered in weapon systems that were all now tracking his fleet with inhuman precision. Then one of his captains made a mistake. On the destroyer Relentless Fury, a junior tactical officer panicked. Seeing the human weapons tracking his ship, he activated targeting protocols, locking his vessel's main weapons onto the absolute horizon. It was not an attack, not a firing command, just targeting. But to the absolute horizon's defensive AI, it was an unambiguous hostile action. 4.3 seconds. That was how long the engagement lasted. The absolute horizon's point defense systems opened fire simultaneously across 8,000 independent turrets. Particle beams, each no thicker than a human hair, lanced out at near light speed. They did not target crew compartments or life support systems. They did not aim for reactors or power plants. The AI was programmed to disable, not destroy. Each beam found a weapon system. Missile tubes were sliced open, their internal mechanisms fused into useless metal. Energy cannon barrels were severed cleanly from their mounts. Point defense clusters exploded as focused energy turned their ammunition into plasma. Across 1,200 ships, every single weapon system was surgically removed in 4 seconds of the most precise military action the galaxy had ever witnessed. Then the firing stopped. Admiral Cross stared at his displays in absolute silence. Every ship in his fleet showed the same status. Weapons destroyed, hull intact, crew alive. The human ship had fired thousands of shots, each one finding its target with impossible accuracy, each one calculated to disable without killing. His fleet was still intact, still operational in every way except the one that mattered. They were defenseless. Medical status, he managed to say. No casualties reported, Admiral. Across the entire fleet, not a single crew member injured. They took our weapons and left everything else untouched. On the absolute horizon, Captain Wilson released a breath she did not know she had been holding. Status report. All Tarn vessels disabled, Lieutenant Park responded. 0 casualties on their side. 0 shots fired at us. Defensive protocols completed successfully. Open a channel to the Tarn flagship. Admiral Cross's face appeared on Wilson's screen. He looked like a man who had seen his death and been spared for reasons he did not understand. Admiral Cross, my defensive systems interpreted your fleet's actions as hostile. I deeply regret this incident, but I warned High Chancellor Brovik that approaching my vessel in attack formation would trigger automated responses. I trust your crews are unharmed. No casualties, Cross said, his voice hollow. You destroyed every weapon on every ship but killed no one. Those were my orders to our AI, Admiral. Disable threats, preserve life. Humanity did not come here to kill. We came to talk. I hope this incident will convince your leadership that we are serious about both capabilities. Wilson closed the channel and slumped in her chair. The crisis was over, but the consequences were just beginning. In 4 seconds, humanity had proven beyond doubt that they could destroy the galaxy's most powerful fleet without breaking a sweat. And they had done it while being careful not to kill anyone. The message was clear. Humanity was strong enough to conquer, but chose not to. They were powerful enough to destroy, but chose to disable. They had the capability for genocide, but the restraint to spare every life. That restraint, more than the weapons themselves, was what would change everything. The council chamber had never been silent like this. In 10,000 cycles of galactic governance, through wars and treaties, through the rise and fall of empires, there had always been noise. Argument, debate, negotiation. But now, as representatives from 38 species gathered for the emergency session, no one spoke. They simply sat in their designated areas, staring at the empty space where High Chancellor Brovik should have been standing. The Tarn leader had not appeared. His throne sat empty, a symbol of power that suddenly seemed meaningless. The species that had ruled the council for 3,000 cycles had been humbled in 4 seconds, their entire military fleet reduced to defenseless hulks floating in space. Ships were already being dispatched to tow the disabled vessels to repair facilities, but the damage to Tarn Pride would take much longer to fix. David Reed stood at his small desk in the human section, waiting. He had spent the past 6 hours in emergency meetings with Captain Wilson, Earth Command, and various ambassadors who suddenly wanted private conversations with humanity's representative. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. What would humanity do with this power? Ambassador Sila entered the chamber and took her position in the Dreven section. She caught David's eye and gave a small gesture of support. Her species had always advocated for peace and cooperation. Now they saw in humanity a potential ally that could enforce the peace they had always dreamed of. Admiral Cross arrived next, his posture rigid with military discipline despite the disaster his fleet had suffered. He sat in the Vryn gallery without speaking, though his eyes never left the display at the center of the chamber that showed the absolute horizon, still maintaining position 15,000 kilometers from the station. One by one, the representatives gathered. Some arrived in groups, clearly having coordinated their responses. Others came alone, uncertain about how to proceed. The old alliances and power structures that had governed galactic politics for millennia seemed suddenly irrelevant when faced with a species that could disable 4,000 warships in the time it took most beings to blink. Finally, High Chancellor Brovik entered. He moved slowly, his forearms held close to his body in a posture that Tarn used to signal defeat. He climbed to his throne but did not sit, instead standing before it like a supplicant rather than a ruler. The Council recognizes Ambassador David Reed of Humanity, Brovik said, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. The Council wishes to hear humanity's terms. David had prepared for this moment. Earth's diplomatic corps had spent months developing strategy, considering every possible scenario. But standing here now, looking at the faces of species that had mocked humanity days ago and now feared them, he set aside the prepared speech. This moment required honesty, not diplomacy. High Chancellor, members of the Council, I want to begin by apologizing for the incident with the Tarn fleet. The Absolute Horizon's defensive systems acted exactly as designed, but I know that many of you now have friends and colleagues dealing with the shock of what happened. Captain Wilson and her crew take no pleasure in what occurred. It was a tragic miscommunication that we hope will not be repeated. You call it a miscommunication, a Kelvin representative said. You destroyed our most powerful fleet in seconds. We disabled your fleet, David corrected. Not a single life was lost. Not a single ship was destroyed. Our systems removed weapons while preserving everything else. If humanity wanted to kill, everyone on those ships would be dead. We chose differently. The distinction seemed to resonate. Several representatives exchanged glances, reconsidering their initial reactions. The fact that humanity had shown restraint even in self-defense was significant. Which brings me to humanity's position, David continued. 3 days ago, we asked to join this council as equals. We were denied because we lacked the military strength you respect. Now we have demonstrated that strength. Some of you fear that humanity will use the Absolute Horizon and her sister ships to conquer the galaxy, to impose our will on all of you. I am here to tell you that your fears are understandable but misplaced. He activated his display, and images appeared above his desk. Not weapons or warships, but something else entirely. Cities filled with parks and gardens. Orbital habitats where families lived and worked. Research stations dedicated to science and art. Universities where humans studied everything from quantum mechanics to ancient poetry. This is what humanity values: peace, knowledge, growth, community. We did not reach the stars because we wanted to conquer. We reached the stars because we wanted to explore, to learn, to meet others who look up at the night sky and wonder what is out there. The Titan-class vessels exist to protect this dream, not to impose it on others. But you have the power to impose it, Admiral Cross said quietly. I have commanded fleets for 40 cycles, Ambassador. I know what your ships can do. 7 Titan-class vessels could conquer the entire galaxy within a year. Why should we believe you will not? David met the Admiral's eyes. Because humanity has already conquered itself, Admiral. Our history is full of empires and wars, of strong nations subjugating weak ones. We have seen what happens when power is used without wisdom. When strength is valued above compassion. We nearly destroyed ourselves learning these lessons. The radiation scars on our homeworld from ancient nuclear wars are still visible from orbit. We know the price of conquest, and we choose not to pay it again. He paused, letting the revelation sink in. The assembled species had not known that humanity's past included self-inflicted near extinction. It changed the context of everything. So here are humanity's terms, David said. We want full membership in the Galactic Council with equal voting rights and representation. We want fair trade agreements that allow human goods and services to compete in galactic markets. We want cultural exchange programs so our species can learn from each other. We want research partnerships to advance science and technology together, and we want treaties that guarantee mutual defense and cooperation. That is all? Brovik asked, suspicion clear in his voice. That is all, High Chancellor. We do not want tribute. We do not want vassals. We do not want territory beyond the systems we already claim. We simply want to be part of the galactic community as equals. The Absolute Horizon exists to ensure that we maintain that equality. that no one can threaten humanity without facing consequences. But we have no interest in threatening others. Ambassador Scylla stood in her section. I move that the Council accept humanity's terms and grant full membership status immediately. We have seen their strength. Let us now embrace their offer of friendship before fear drives us to make enemies of potential allies. Seconded. Another voice called, then another. Within moments, a dozen species had voiced support. The mood in the chamber was shifting. Fear was giving way to pragmatic calculation. Humanity was too powerful to fight. Their terms were reasonable, and the alternative to acceptance was facing 7 Titan-class vessels as enemies, rather than 1 as an ally. The vote was called. One by one, species cast their votes on the display. Green lights for acceptance, red for rejection, yellow for abstention. The green lights multiplied rapidly. Some species abstained, unwilling to fully commit but not daring to reject outright. Only 3 votes showed red, species too proud or too foolish to accept the new reality. The final tally appeared. 31 votes for acceptance, 3 against, 4 abstaining. Humanity had achieved more than council membership. They had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had been accepted as a major power not through conquest or generations of diplomatic maneuvering, but through simple demonstration of capability combined with restraint. The motion passes, Brovik announced. Humanity is granted full council membership effective immediately. Ambassador Reed, you will be assigned a permanent delegation area and voting privileges. Welcome to the galactic community. David bowed slightly, a human gesture of respect that had no equivalent in most alien cultures. Thank you, High Chancellor. Earth looks forward to long and productive relationships with all member species. As the formal session ended, David remained at his desk, watching as representatives filed out. Some avoided looking at him. Others nodded in acknowledgement. A few, like Ambassador Scylla, approached to offer genuine congratulations and discuss future cooperation. Through the chamber's transparent sections, the absolute horizon was visible, a dark shape that blocked out stars, the ship that had changed everything. 7 existed, with 3 more under construction. In another generation, there would be more. Humanity was building a fleet that could defend not just Earth, but potentially the entire galaxy. David wondered what the future would bring. Would other species try to match humanity's technology? Would they form alliances against the human threat? Or would they embrace the opportunity to learn from each other, to grow together under the protection of ships like the Absolute Horizon? Time would tell. But for now, humanity had achieved its goal. They had come to the stars and demanded to be treated as equals. And through a combination of overwhelming capability and careful restraint, they had made the galaxy listen. The age of human isolation was over. The age of human integration into galactic society had begun. And somewhere in the depths of space, 6 other Titan-class vessels waited, silent guardians of a species that had learned through bitter experience that strength without wisdom leads to destruction, but wisdom without strength leads to extinction. Humanity had found the balance. Now they would see if the rest of the galaxy could learn to live with it.